Cameron Bridges was 17 when a Harvard professor laughed and said, "Solve this and you pass." He did. In 60 seconds. The room didn't clap. It froze. Then someone called campus security. Not because he was wrong, but because he was black. What happened next wasn't about math, it was about erasure. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The late morning sun filtered through the tall arched windows of Hawthorne Hall, casting long beams across the polished desks. The lecture room always felt like a museum. Old wood, older portraits, and the silent pressure of history built into every brick. Students filed in with the same nonchalant entitlement, typical of Ivy League mornings, carrying the soft arrogance of people who believed the world already belonged to them. Cameron Bridges felt that weight differently. He sat in the front row, not out of confidence, not out of pride, but because he learned early in life that distance, any distance, could turn into an excuse. Too far back? They said he wasn't paying attention. Too far to the side? They said he lacked engagement. So the very front became his armor, his shield, his unspoken declaration that he deserved to be there as much as anyone else, even if half the room believed he didn't. At 17, Cameron was the youngest student in the dual-credit STEM cohort. Harvard had launched the previous year. Back home in Atlanta, teachers described him as a phenomenon, a rare mind, a quiet storm. But here, those same qualities made him suspicious. A black teen with perfect near-instant recall, solving problems faster than postdocs. To some that sounded less like talent, and more like an uncomfortable challenge. He felt the glances each morning, small, sharp, cutting. How did he get in? What connection did he use? What neighborhood is he from? Questions whispered behind raised coffee cups. They never said the words out loud, but prejudice rarely needed volume. It worked perfectly fine in silence. Dr. Reginald Hawthorne entered with the stiff posture of a man, allergic to being questioned. His tweed blazer hung like a uniform he never took off, and his chin lifted as though the air around him needed filtering. He didn't look at Cameron when he spoke, even when Cameron was the only student whose hand remained raised. Today, the professor strode in with a particular sharpness, lecture's notes tucked under his arm, jaw clenched, irritation radiating in subtle waves. He placed his papers down, tapped his marker twice, and said, "Let's start with something fun." The class groaned. Even the way he said fun sounded punitive. Something to wake the neurons. Hawthorne continued, "Here's a problem none of you will solve today." He smiled tightly, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "But perhaps trying will humble a few of you." A few students chuckled. Hawthorne turned toward the board, drawing a long, complex expression, an interwoven challenge of nested integrals, a rare limit identity, and what looked like an impossible constraint. It wasn't standard curriculum. It wasn't even competitive math material. This was the sort of thing mathematicians debated over wine at midnight conferences. When he finished, he stepped back and said, "Who wants to embarrass themselves first?" More laughter. Cameron stared at the board, his brain firing instantly, the way it always did, with patterns, colors, connections blooming into place like a constellation he had seen 1,000 times. He didn't raise his hand. Not yet. He simply leaned forward, scanning the board carefully, silently, methodically. Then Hawthorne added, "Solve this, and you pass today's assessment, completely exempt." He glanced around the room. "But no one will, so let's move on." Cameron wrote. One line, then another. His pencil moved across the notebook in confident strokes, not rushed, not frantic, but precise. The girl sitting next to him, Brittany Langford, wealthy, fast-talking, permanently unimpressed, leaned over and whispered, "You're actually trying. It's a joke." Cameron didn't answer. The lines connected in his head even faster now. A substitution, a hidden symmetry in the expression. A collapsing sequence, something elegant beneath the noise. He flipped to the next page and wrote the final line. Then he stopped. Exactly 60 seconds after Hawthorne had set the problem, Cameron put his pencil down and lifted his eyes. The room didn't shift immediately. It rolled slowly, like a wave realizing too late that it had gathered too much momentum. Students noticed him first. His stillness, his closed notebook, his expression, then murmurs, then stared. Brittany's face tightened. "Wait, you're done." Cameron nodded quietly. Hawthorne, overhearing her, forced a thin smirk. "Mr. Bridges," he said with the tone of a man preparing to be entertained, You look rather confident for someone who should be overwhelmed. Cameron's voice remained steady. I finished. A soft ripple of disbelief crossed the room. Hawthorne blinked slowly, unimpressed. You finished. He said the word like it tasted foreign. Yes, Cameron replied. A few students exchanged eye contact, mocking, amused. One boy whispered loud enough for the row to hear. Bro thinks he's a genius. Hawthorne crossed his arms. Well, I suppose you'd like to enlighten us all. Cameron opened his notebook and walked it to the desk. He held it out with both hands. Careful. Respectful. Hawthorne didn't take it. He stared at Cameron, then at the notebook, then back again. There was something sharp in his eyes now. Something evaluative, critical, searching for cracks. Finally, with a reluctant sigh, he snatched the notebook from Cameron's hands. He scanned the first line, then the second. His brows pulled together. He turned the page. Then the next. He reached the final line, and paused, lips parting in the slightest, almost imperceptible twitch. A tension pulsed through the classroom. One student whispered, "No way." Another leaned forward. Did he get it? Hawthorne didn't speak. He just stood there staring at the neat stack of reasoning laid out in front of him. The equation, the collapse, the symmetry, everything lined up, everything was correct. Cameron wasn't surprised. He had grown used to the way adults looked at him when intellect broke the boundaries they expected. He knew that look well, the one that wasn't pride or admiration. Suspicion. Always suspicion. Finally, Hawthorne rose slowly, his posture stiffening. Something shifted in his expression. Not awe, not respect, but something darker, something defensive, almost territorial. He looked at Cameron and said, "This is interesting." Cameron kept his gaze steady. "It's correct." Hawthorne's fingers tightened around the notebook. "We'll see about that." The room had gone silent enough to hear the faint hum of the overhead lights. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed loud enough to interrupt the moment. Something had changed, and every student felt it, even if they couldn't name it. Hawthorne took one step back, then another. Then he turned toward the phone mounted on the wall. A couple of students exchanged confused glances. Brittany frowned. "What's he doing?" Hawthorne lifted the receiver and pressed a button. "Campus security," he said flatly. "I need 2 officers to Hawthorne Hall, room 120. Every head jerked toward Cameron. Cameron's heartbeat thudded once hard, and then settled into a quiet, controlled pace, the way his body always responded when danger arrived, wrapped in politeness. He opened his mouth slightly, confusion touching the edges of his calm. "Sir, why?" Hawthorne didn't look at him. "Because academic dishonesty is not tolerated here." Gasps scattered through the room like startled birds. Cameron felt heat rise in his chest. "You think I cheated?" Hawthorne spoke without turning his head. "You solved a problem you shouldn't even understand." A few students flinched at the coldness in his tone. Cameron inhaled slowly, grounding himself. "I didn't cheat. You can ask me to walk through the—" "You will say nothing further." Hawthorne finally faced him, eyes hard, voice colder. "Not until we determine who gave you the solution." Cameron stood frozen, not in fear, but in a stunned stillness that came from witnessing something deeply familiar. Prejudgment dressed as procedure, bias wrapped in authority, racism cloaked in academic decorum. Hawthorne clutched the notebook under his arm, stepped forward, and said loud enough for the entire room to hear, "Until security arrives, you will stay where I can see you." The class stared at Cameron, some shocked, some entertained, some quietly relieved it wasn't them. Cameron didn't blink. He lifted his chin slowly, maintaining the dignity that the moment tried to strip from him. Hawthorne's jaw tightened. He stepped even closer. Then, without warning, he snatched Cameron's notebook from under his arm, gripped it tightly, and said into the phone, "Send someone fast. We may have a serious situation." The room froze. Cameron's breath caught, and the door behind the class creaked open. 2 uniformed security officers stepped inside. Hawthorne turned to them, pointed at Cameron, and said, "That's the student. Take his bag." The officers stepped into the room with the quiet authority that made everything suddenly feel like it wasn't just about a classroom anymore. Their black uniforms, Harvard police patches, and radios clipped to their shoulders sent a message before they even opened their mouths. One of them, Officer Pearson, tall, broad-shouldered, with a shaved head, scanned the room like he expected chaos. His partner, a younger woman named Officer Delaney, stood back, watching Cameron like he was already guilty of something. Dr. Hawthorne wasted no time. He pointed directly at Cameron without even acknowledging the class. That's the student. I need his belongings checked immediately. Cameron didn't move. He didn't argue. He just stared, first at the professor, then at the officers, his chest rising slowly as he swallowed the moment whole. There were no shouts, no resistance, only disbelief, quiet, heavy, humiliating. Officer Pearson approached. Sir, we need you to step aside and open your bag. Cameron blinked. Why? The officer's tone dropped. Just do it. Do you want to see my ID? Cameron asked, voice controlled but trembling just underneath. I'm registered. I'm in the program. Pearson didn't flinch. We're asking who brought you here. That line broke something. Not what's your name. Not are you enrolled. Not can you prove you're a student. Just who brought you here. Like he couldn't have possibly gotten here on his own. Like the idea of a black teenager solving an elite math problem in seconds wasn't just unbelievable. It was threatening. The class was silent. Even the students who'd mocked Cameron earlier now seemed uneasy. Brittany looked down, shifting awkwardly in her chair. One guy near the back started recording quietly under the desk. Cameron reached for his bag, fingers calm, movements measured. He pulled out his school-issued ID badge from the dual credit program. It had his name, his Harvard ID number, and a blue sticker with the words, Visiting STEM Scholar, Verified, printed clearly across the bottom. He held it up. Pearson didn't even glance at it. We need to search your bag, the officer repeated. Cameron handed it over. Inside were only the essentials. 2 notebooks, a graphing calculator, a pencil case, and a Harvard dining hall receipt. Delaney rifled through it quickly, and then looked up, confused. There's nothing here, she said. Pearson stepped back, clearly unsure how to continue. Hawthorne cleared his throat with irritation. He solved a problem that wasn't part of the assigned curriculum. No one else in this room even understood it. He either received outside help or used unauthorized material. The officers exchanged a glance. Cameron stepped forward, voice low and direct. You accused me of cheating without asking me a single question. Hawthorne didn't answer. You called security because I solved a problem you thought I couldn't solve. Still nothing. You never even asked how I did it. No one in the room moved. Then Hawthorne said, You're 17. You're not even a full-time student. This was not material covered in the program. So what does that make me? Cameron asked. An intruder? A criminal? Hawthorne finally turned to the officers. Contact the program administrator. I want verification of this student's placement. If this is what it looks like, an error or falsification, we have a serious breach. Pearson nodded and walked out to place the call. Delaney remained behind, awkward now, as if she could feel the temperature of the room shift. The other students watched everything, some pretending to scroll on their laptops, others frozen entirely. Cameron stood straighter, eyes locked on Hawthorne. You don't believe I belong here. Say it. Hawthorne flinched but didn't respond. You don't have to. Everything you've done says it for you. It was in that moment, in the raw quiet, that a truth unfolded for everyone watching. This wasn't about academic honesty. This was about a young black student being too good in the wrong room. 5 minutes later, the door opened again. Meredith Platt walked in, holding a leather folder, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Cameron had only met her twice, once during orientation, and again briefly during the program's welcome mixer. She'd seemed professional, focused, always typing something on her tablet, never making much eye contact. She looked around the room, then at Cameron. What's going on? She asked the officers. Pearson replied, We need confirmation. Professor Hawthorne suspects a student of academic dishonesty and Meredith held up a hand to cut him off. Who's the student? Pearson pointed. Meredith looked at Cameron. Her expression didn't change, but something in her posture shifted. Her eyes scanned him quickly, then narrowed, as if searching for a way out of this. Cameron Bridges, she said aloud, reading his name off his badge. Then she opened her folder. Cameron waited, his chest tight. This was the moment where it would all either fall back into place or unravel completely. Surely, she would clear this up. Surely someone in this room still believed in rules, in fairness, in facts. She flipped a page, then another. Her eyes darted across the line items. Then she spoke. In our last official review, Cameron was listed under provisional acceptance pending final placement. Cameron blinked. What? The room stiffened. Hawthorne raised an eyebrow. Meaning. Meredith didn't look up from the folder. meaning his placement may have been logged into the system before all approval processes were complete. Pearson tilted his head. So, he might not be officially enrolled? Cameron felt like the air had been knocked out of him. That's not true, he said, more to her than anyone else. You signed my papers. I have the welcome packet. I've been attending classes for 5 weeks. Meredith finally met his eyes. And what Cameron saw there wasn't confusion. It wasn't even regret. It was strategy. She was choosing her words carefully. Until I can confirm that all paperwork went through proper verification channels, she said, we need to treat this as a potential error in the admission system. Hawthorne exhaled slowly. Satisfied. Cameron's heart pounded. I passed the assessment. I met the GPA threshold. I did everything right. Meredith nodded mechanically. This isn't about you doing anything wrong, Cameron. It might simply be a clerical oversight. But Cameron knew better. It wasn't oversight. It was insulation. It was the soft, well-practiced language of systems protecting themselves from disruption. Meredith wasn't trying to find the truth. She was trying to maintain the illusion that everything still made sense. That someone like Cameron being here had to be a mistake. Delaney spoke for the first time. Ma'am, is this student authorized to remain in the program until this is resolved? Meredith closed the folder. Then said the words that made Cameron's stomach drop. Temporarily suspend his participation. Until we verify placement. He should not be in any classes. Gasps rippled through the class. Someone muttered, Yo, what? Cameron felt his hands go cold. You're suspending me? Right now? She didn't answer. Hawthorne stepped aside and looked smug. Cameron's mouth tightened. You know exactly what this is. Meredith didn't blink. I'm simply following protocol. Cameron reached into his backpack and pulled out the welcome letter. Holding it up. This is signed by your office. Dated. Time-stamped. I didn't fake my way in here. Pearson took the letter and glanced at it, then looked at Meredith. She shrugged. Until it's verified, it's not official. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was the system folding in on itself as it always did to protect the gate. To protect the walls of ivy. Cameron stood there, humiliated in front of his peers, in front of officers, in front of people who would now forever see him as a question mark, not a student. Then, just as the tension seemed to plateau, Brittany Langford stood up. She looked at Meredith. This is insane. He's literally smarter than half the PhD students here. Everyone turned. Meredith frowned. Excuse me? Brittany stepped forward. I sit next to him. Every day. He doesn't cheat. He doesn't even talk. You're punishing him because he made your professor look bad. Cameron's heart raced. He hadn't expected anyone to speak up. Meredith stiffened.
That's an inappropriate accusation.
No, Brittany said. What's inappropriate is assuming the only black kid in here can't possibly be this smart. The room exploded into murmurs. Hawthorne scowled. Meredith's face went pale. And then just as everything started spiraling, Officer Pearson's radio crackled. A voice came through. We have an incoming call from a faculty member. Urgent. Regarding this student's placement. Pearson lifted the receiver. He listened. Nodded. Then turned to Meredith slowly. He says you're wrong, the officer said. That this student's placement was fully authorized, and he's ready to testify to that right now. Meredith froze. Cameron narrowed his eyes. Who was it? Pearson looked up, then answered. Dean Wexler. He says there's something you didn't want anyone to see. Meredith's face goes pale as the room spins toward her, and she suddenly reaches for her phone with shaking hands. Meredith Platt's hand hovered over her phone as whispers filled the lecture hall. The weight of her title, her image, her proximity to a brewing scandal, all of it clashed in her pale, frozen expression. Dean Wexler's name had landed like a hammer, and everyone saw it hit her. She slowly stepped aside to take the call in private, but by then the damage had already been done. The moment was burned into every phone camera, every hushed voice, every eye that had watched her try to erase a student in real time, and fail. Within the hour, Dean Wexler confirmed publicly that Cameron Bridges' acceptance was not only authorized, but had passed through an additional level of academic review due to his extraordinary scores. Meredith had signed off on it. Her denial hadn't been an oversight. It had been a calculated dodge. The university scrambled. A quiet, internal review began, but no one said the word racism. Not one. They used softer terms. Breakdown in communication. Misalignment between offices. A misunderstanding of procedural clarity. But the halls of Harvard didn't run on what was said out loud. They pulsed with what was implied, and Cameron heard every implication. The following week felt like a slow suffocation. He returned to class, notebook in hand, credentials intact, but everything was different. The stares lasted longer now. The whispers didn't pause when he walked by. What had once been doubt was now rejection layered with discomfort. Like his presence wasn't just wrong, it was a liability. The first sign was subtle. He walked into his quantum logic seminar and sat down next to Samir, a grad student who'd been helping him review problem sets. Samir usually greeted him with a casual fist bump. Today, he simply nodded and shifted his chair half an inch away. "Late night," he muttered. Cameron nodded back, pretending he hadn't noticed. But he did. In his algorithms and systems class, he raised his hand to contribute a counterexample. Professor Liu, who had previously praised his lateral thinking, glanced right past him. She called on another student, who repeated part of what Cameron had just whispered to himself. Liu smiled. "Exactly. Well put." Cameron let his hand fall quietly. Then came the lunch table. Before, he'd sit with a rotating group of STEM kids. No real friendships yet, but enough casual nods and borrowed chargers to feel semi-included. But now, as he approached, he caught the glance Brittany gave to the others. Not hostile, just cautious, like they were calculating whether his presence would make them a target. He turned away before they could wave him over. The worst moment arrived during the weekly collaborative study session, hosted in the campus library's north wing. Students from across the science departments gathered to work through mock exam problems and trade notes. Cameron arrived early, set out his binder, and waited. No one joined his table. He moved closer to another group and asked, "Mind if I sit in?" One girl, redhead, strong Boston accent, looked up with tight politeness. "We're full. Sorry." There were 3 open chairs. Cameron stepped back, feeling the burn behind his eyes. Not tears, just a heat, a familiar one. Back home, he'd learned how to process these kinds of cuts. In middle school, it had been teachers doubting he wrote his own essays. In high school, it was peers shocked that he placed in national math competitions. But here it was layered in a subtlety that made it harder to fight. No one yelled. No one insulted him. They just stopped seeing him. It wasn't erasure by force. It was erasure by permission. By the end of the second week, Cameron's name had been quietly removed from a mentorship program email list. When he asked the student coordinator about it, she apologized and said she thought he'd withdrawn. He hadn't, and the excuse didn't even make sense. Worse, a group project he'd been assigned in his engineering ethics class was suddenly restructured. The new groups were posted on the board. He wasn't in any of them. He stood outside Professor Alcott's office after class. "I think there's been a mistake," he said. Alcott looked over his glasses. "Actually, Cameron, after your recent visibility, some of the students expressed discomfort." Discomfort with what? With the idea that your academic work might become a distraction. Cameron stared at him. Alcott's voice lowered, as if he were offering a kindness. "Some students feel you're receiving attention that isn't reflective of earned community trust." Cameron barely heard the rest. He walked out, heart pounding again, but this time it wasn't from confusion. It was anger, controlled, buried, but pulsing beneath his skin. He wasn't being doubted anymore. He was being erased. Not because he failed, but because he succeeded too loudly. The real shock came 2 days later. He was leaving the lecture hall, earbuds in, scanning his notes, when his phone buzzed with a notification. Subject: Cameron didn't solve that. He stole it. His stomach twisted. He tapped it. It was an anonymous email blast. Sent from a fake address. No name. No. Inside the body was a single paragraph. Multiple students witnessed Cameron Bridges copying from another source during the in-class math challenge administered by Dr. Hawthorne. The solution matches an obscure math forum post from 2 years ago. This must be investigated. No one solves problems like that without help. Below that was a low-res image of a complex equation. A screenshot from a message board titled Advanced Math Olympiad Rejections. Cameron read it twice. Then, a third time. His fingers trembled as he scrolled. They had gone digging through obscure forums, searching for anything that could cast doubt. And now they'd found something. Anything to attach to a new lie. He didn't know who sent it. He didn't care. But the accusation didn't have to be true. It just had to circulate. And circulate it did. By the next morning, students were whispering again, but now with a new edge. Not curiosity. Not discomfort. Just judgment. "Did you see the email?" Someone said it matches line for line. I knew it was too fast. That same morning, in class, Professor Liu passed him without eye contact. Not even a nod, as if the email had already decided something that the administration never would. He checked his inbox again. There was no response from any official, but the subject line remained burned into his brain. He stole it. No one had ever called him a thief to his face before. But now, it was floating in digital ink across campus. And the worst part? The equation from the message board wasn't even the same. He saw the differences immediately. A rearranged variable, a missed constraint, a non-functional substitution. But he knew explaining that wouldn't matter, because the people who wanted him gone weren't interested in facts. They were interested in the comfort of their world, unbothered, uninterrupted, untouched. And a black kid solving elite math problems in 60 seconds. That interrupted everything. That made people uncomfortable. As he stood under the rust-stained arches of the library that afternoon, gripping his phone, watching the sun flicker off the stone path, he finally realized the truth. This wasn't about a problem on a board. It never had been. It was about presence, his presence, and how threatening it became when it didn't fit their expectation of what brilliance was supposed to look like. The first email was bad enough, but it was the follow-up that shattered the last illusion of fairness. 10 minutes later, another message hit his inbox. Short. One line. You're not the first, but you're not ready for what comes next. No signature. Just fear, weaponized through subtlety. That night, Cameron checks his inbox again and finds a new message with an attached audio file. It begins with static, then a familiar voice. Cameron. They did the same thing to me. Cameron's thumb hovered over the play button. The audio file opened with a rush of static, then silence, then a woman's voice. Calm, slow, and bruised with memory. Cameron. They did the same thing to me. His eyes locked on the screen, breath still, body rigid as the recording continued. And if you're hearing this, it means they're doing it again. Maybe worse this time. The file cut off abruptly. No name. No context. Just a voice. Someone older, scarred, and reaching out through the shadows of Harvard's past to warn him. Cameron sat frozen in the corner of the library, earbuds in, heart racing. Outside, fall leaves danced along the cobbled path. Inside, his world fractured another inch. That same morning, the anonymous email had already detonated like a bomb. Reddit caught it first. Someone posted the original email with a screen cap of the math problem. A photo of Cameron sitting in class, head down, notebook open, and the title, Harvard Imposter, Black Kid Solves Impossible Problem. Reddit math detectives think he cheated. By noon, it was the #2 trending thread on the front page. By 3 p.m., it was on Twitter. By evening, it was on TikTok, with white college students stitching videos titled, Here's Why He's Lying, while smugly circling equations they barely understood. And by nightfall, Cameron Bridges was no longer just a Harvard STEM student. He was a hashtag, a symbol, a target. The comments weren't just skeptical, they were savage. Bet he couldn't pass a Taco Bell application test. Harvard's gone soft. Affirmative action gone nuclear. He's just mad he got caught. You can take the kid out of the hood. But Cameron had never posted much on social media. His accounts were clean, mostly academic updates, and the occasional family photo. But that didn't stop them. People went deep, scouring every corner of his online presence, like scavengers. They found a photo from 8th grade, Cameron at a cookout, his cousin playfully throwing up a peace sign, both of them laughing. The caption read, Summer flexin' with the fam. Reddit grabbed it and twisted it. Harvard's math genius still talks like he's on parole. Instagram threads compared his skin tone to memes. TikTok creators used split screens to analyze his voice, mocking his southern drawl as if intellect had a dialect requirement. And when a tiny blog defending Cameron's performance surfaced, written by a black professor at a small liberal arts college, its comment section exploded with racial slurs. Cameron watched it all unfold like a slow-motion collapse. Each swipe on his phone peeled back another layer of cruelty. Each comment pierced deeper than the last. Not because it was unfamiliar, but because it was no longer private. He was being devoured. And the world was watching. Back in Atlanta, his mother had seen the firestorm too. She called 3 times in a row before Cameron finally picked up. Her voice cracked before she even finished the first sentence. Baby, come home. Please. He didn't say anything. You don't need this. You don't have to prove anything to them. We can enroll you somewhere else. Somewhere that sees you, really sees you. Still, he was quiet. Her voice dropped lower. They're not going to stop. You understand that, right? This isn't about school anymore. It's about you. I can't leave, he finally whispered. Why not? Because that's what they want. His mother exhaled like her lungs couldn't hold all her fear. You're 17. You're a child in a place that was never meant for you. He nodded slowly, though she couldn't see him. I know. That's why I have to stay. He hung up before his voice could crack. The next morning, Cameron's inbox pinged again. This time, it was from the scholarship board. Subject line: scholarship status. Uj. The message was short, clinical, and cold. Dear Cameron Bridget, due to recent inquiries and allegations surrounding academic integrity concerns, your scholarship status is currently under administrative review. You are temporarily suspended from receiving further disbursements pending full investigation. Thank you for your cooperation. He reread it 3 times. Then again, and again. His hands began to tremble. The scholarship had covered room, board and supplies. Without it, he had maybe 3 weeks before his account defaulted. There was no backup, no plan B. And the cruelest part? Not once did the message ask for his side of the story. Just a cold announcement of financial silence. Punishment by hesitation. He sat at the back of the student center, hood up, fingers buried in his sleeves, watching as 2 guys across the room scrolled Reddit threads, and laughed quietly. He could hear fragments of their conversation. Yo, this dude legit thought he'd pass as a genius. White savior complex, but reversed. No shot he solved that in under a minute. That's superhero level. Maybe he's got ChatGPT in his head. Cameron stood and walked out before the nausea turned into something worse. By Thursday, the backlash had matured into a machine. Small YouTubers posted investigations about him. Twitter threads dissected his past SAT scores, with armchair experts claiming his math section wasn't genius tier. A podcast episode titled The Harvard Hoax aired, calling him a symbol of a broken meritocracy. Even academics, tenured ones, began weighing in, careful not to say too much, but saying enough. One tweet from a Princeton professor read, "Brilliance should be measurable. If a claim seems superhuman, scrutiny is not racism. It's rationality." Cameron stared at that one for hours, because it was the most dangerous kind of racism, the kind wrapped in intellectual respectability. That night, he didn't sleep. Instead, he sat at his desk staring at the blank wall above his bed, wondering if he'd ever be seen as human again, or if he'd been permanently turned into a cautionary tale, a racial anomaly, a name attached to a myth. By 2 a.m., he checked his messages again, and there it was. A new message, from Jordan.blah, 89. Subject: I was you 10 years ago. Body: check your voicemail. We need to talk. He did this to me too. Cameron's heart kicked. He opened the attached number. An unknown contact. He pressed play on the voicemail. A woman's voice, steady, older, and furious, in the quietest way. Cameron, my name is Jordan Blake. I was a doctoral candidate under Dr. Hawthorne in 2013. I see what's happening to you. I've lived it. I know how he operates. And I know how this ends. If you don't push back, they erased me. Don't let them do it to you. Cameron sat up straight. He discredited my thesis, took credit for parts of it, and when I challenged him, my academic record mysteriously vanished. They locked me out, gaslit me, made me feel insane. Then they buried me. She paused. Her voice cracked just once. But I saved everything. And I still have it. The papers, the emails, the audio. And you're not alone, Cameron. Not anymore. Cameron stared at the screen, mouth slightly open. A silence filled the room that didn't feel empty. It felt heavy, like the beginning of something, a warning, and a weapon. As he clicks to reply, a second email appears in his inbox, from a burner address. No message, just an attachment titled Hawthorne Whistle Archive, de Sep. The moment Cameron opened the Sep file, he knew he was stepping into something bigger than himself. The folder, titled Hawthorne Whistle Archive, contained over 24 documents, scanned PDFs of internal grade reports, old email threads, grainy screenshots of seminar logs, even a partial audio recording from a 20th. At the center of nearly every document was the same name, Dr. Reginald Hawthorne, and a pattern so subtle, so devastatingly consistent, that it felt less like coincidence and more like design. The next day, Jordan Blake called. Her voice was calmer than her message had been, but it held the same quiet rage. I wasn't supposed to find out what he did to me, she said. But when someone in administration slipped and mentioned my file had been flagged, I started digging. Cameron sat in his dorm, earbuds in, eyes locked on the screen as he listened. I was the only black woman in the doctoral seminar on algorithmic probability. Hawthorne gave me the lowest grade in the cohort, even though I had the strongest analytics portfolio. I asked why. He said I was too theoretical, not practical enough. Whatever that means. Cameron didn't need her to explain. He'd heard those coded words before. I wrote a thesis draft he didn't like. It questioned the foundational assumptions in his published research. 2 weeks later, I got an email saying my committee review had been postponed indefinitely. The feedback vanished. I filed a formal grievance. What happened? Cameron asked. I never heard back. Then my advisor changed. Without warning. Suddenly, I was no longer in the PhD program. No expulsion. No explanation. Just erased. She paused. I spent 3 years thinking it was me. Cameron leaned forward. Why didn't anyone speak up back then? Because he's insulated. She replied. He doesn't break rules. He bends them so quietly. No one notices until it's too late. And the people he targets? They're always alone. Always the first. The youngest. The only. That line hit Cameron like a blunt object. The only. He had been the only two. That weekend, while the campus buzzed with tailgates and game day noise, Cameron dug into the data Jordan had collected. Her file referenced 3 other former students, one from 2006, another from 2011, and a third in 2017. All black, all high-performing, all removed or transferred after sudden academic re-evaluations. Cameron made a spreadsheet. Timeline. Names. Course load. Patterns. Every case had the same ingredients. Initial academic praise, rapid withdrawal of support, vague accusations of misalignment or methodological inconsistency, and a quiet exit. The university records used soft language, but the effect was hard as stone. They were discredited, shut out, and eventually forced out, without scandal, without noise, erased, but efficiently. Cameron tried emailing one of the names from the list. Langston Hayes, a former graduate student in applied math. He didn't expect a reply. He got one in less than an hour. I've been waiting for someone to find me. They met via Zoom that night. Langston, now in his early 30s, looked worn but sharp. A quiet beard, soft eyes, and a voice that dipped into silence every time he spoke about what happened. He called me exceptionally promising in the first month. Used my work as an example in class. I thought I was safe. What changed? Cameron asked. I submitted a paper suggesting that one of his theorems was inefficient. I used real-time modeling to show it could be improved. Within days, he stopped replying to my emails. Told my research group, I lacked disciplinary clarity. I lost my research assistantship a week later. Langston leaned in. The final blow was when he accused me of plagiarizing a model he'd introduced in a prior seminar. But the math was mine. He just didn't like that I improved it. Cameron clenched his fists under the desk. And you reported it? I tried. The department said there wasn't sufficient evidence of wrongdoing. Told me to rework my thesis under a different advisor. I left Harvard that spring. Langston shook his head. He didn't just ruin my degree. He made me question my mind. For years. Cameron ended the call with a racing pulse. There was no denying it. Now, Hawthorne wasn't just a gatekeeper. He was an architect of silence, of sabotage, of systemic erasure disguised as rigor. That night, Cameron printed everything. The archive, Jordan's timeline, Langston's transcript. He laid it out across his dorm floor like a crime board, string and all. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't conjecture. It was a pattern. And he was the newest thread. He didn't sleep that night. The next day, something happened that forced him to see just how far the rot had spread. A classmate, Julius Len, a quiet second year who usually kept to himself, slipped him a folded piece of paper after class. I heard what you're working on, Julius said under his breath. You didn't hear this from me. Cameron unfolded the note. Hawthorne's altering the midterm format. He's telling others it's standard, but you're getting a different version, way harder. Material he never covered. Be ready. Cameron blinked. What are you talking about? He asked. Julius looked around. My roommate's a TA. I saw the drafts. They're not the same. He said Hawthorne called it necessary calibration. Cameron's stomach turned. It wasn't just character assassination anymore. It was academic sabotage. Direct, intentional, coordinated. He stared at the note again, harder version. Uncovered material. Just for him. The words rang like a siren. He thanked Julius quietly, then slipped the paper into his notebook. Later that day, he went straight to the campus printer lab and made 3 copies of every piece of evidence. One set for his dorm, one set in a manila folder he taped behind the ceiling tile, and one he mailed home to Atlanta, just in case. Because now it wasn't just about proving he belonged. It was about surviving long enough to prove they had never deserved the power they held. The next morning, Cameron sat alone in the dining hall, stirring cold oatmeal, eyes unfocused. He had 2 days until the midterm. 2 days before Hawthorne tried to ruin him for good. He needed help, and he needed it fast. He opened his laptop and clicked into his email drafts. Then typed, subject, urgent, seeking assistance and witness support. Dear Miss Blake, thank you for everything you've shared so far. I believe Hawthorne is preparing to discredit me again, this time through direct manipulation of my exam. I have evidence, and I've spoken to other former students. I believe we need to act before it's too late. Are you willing to go public with me? Respectfully, Cameron Bridges. He stared at the screen, then hit send. A reply came less than 15 minutes later. I thought you'd never ask. Let's burn this down. As he packs up his things, Cameron gets a text from a blocked number. Midterm instructions changed again. They're preparing something worse. It's not just about failing you, it's about breaking you. The message from the blocked number buzzed on Cameron's screen like a quiet scream. Midterm instructions changed again. They're preparing something worse. It's not just about failing you, it's about breaking you. He stared at the text, heart pounding, mind flashing through every conversation, every email, every person who had smiled too politely in the last few weeks. He couldn't trust the sender, but he couldn't ignore the warning either. Not after everything he'd seen. The countdown to the midterm had begun. 2 days, 48 hours, and suddenly everything around Cameron began to shift. It started with a small detail. His login credentials to the university's study portal stopped working. At first he thought it was a glitch. He emailed the IT desk. No reply. Then he tried accessing the shared drive with archived lectures. Access denied. His personal study folder, the one with all annotated class slides marked not found. The deeper he dug, the more cracks appeared. Classmates in his seminar casually mentioned a revised syllabus. One student in passing asked, "Did you see they're including that advanced chaos module in the midterm?" Cameron blinked. What chaos module? The student frowned. It was in the last syllabus email. Cameron checked his inbox. Nothing. No email. No update. Nothing. He opened the course forum, but his user profile had been reset. All his saved bookmarks. Gone. No new posts visible. It was as if he was a ghost in the system. A participant in name only. That night, Cameron sat alone in the common room, with 3 textbooks open, desperately trying to reverse engineer what the revised exam might include. He had no idea what would be on it. No direction, no clarity, only one truth pulsed through his thoughts. This is intentional. The next morning, Jordan called again. "I've been through it," she said. "They disorient you on purpose. Make you doubt your memory, your preparation. It's how they shift the narrative. Suddenly, your failure becomes your fault." Cameron didn't respond. His silence said more than words could. By midterm morning, he barely slept 2 hours. The test was set to begin at 9 a.m. sharp in Maxwell Hall, room 308. He arrived early, too early, hoping to steady himself, to breathe before the storm. Students trickled in, chatting about last-minute topics. Most looked relaxed, even cheerful. Then the test packets arrived. Professor Hawthorne entered 15 minutes late, carrying a thick manila folder. His expression was unreadable. He set the folder on the desk, looked across the room, and locked eyes with Cameron for one beat too long. Then he smiled. It wasn't warmth. It was something else entirely. The proctor handed out the tests one by one. Cameron received his last. When he opened the packet, his stomach dropped. Half the questions were on material he'd never seen before. Not just advanced, obscure. Irregular derivations of theoretical sequences not discussed in class. Integrals with abnormal constraints. Data modeling structures from outdated editions of a now-defunct textbook. One question referenced a graph type that was removed from the curriculum weeks ago. Cameron's pen hovered above the page. He looked around. Other students were scribbling calmly, flipping through pages, unbothered. They had seen this before. They had studied it. They had been told. He hadn't. This wasn't a test, it was an ambush. Still, Cameron didn't panic. He inhaled slowly, closed his eyes for 3 seconds, and began to work. First, he isolated the questions he recognized. 4 of them matched the older syllabus. He solved them methodically. Then he moved to the unknowns. He didn't guess. He decoded. Line by line, he broke down the language of each unfamiliar problem, looking for patterns. He used everything he'd taught himself since childhood. Logic loops, estimation strategies, symmetry tricks, substitution shortcuts. He began filling the pages. Some solutions were partial, others complete. But each one carried the mark of effort, clarity, and precision. The math didn't intimidate him. What scared him was the motive behind the math. When he reached the final question, he glanced at the clock. He was 20 minutes ahead of schedule. Cameron reviewed his answers. Twice. Then, with a calm he didn't quite feel, he stood up, walked to the front, and handed in the packet. Hawthorne didn't even look at him.
"Thank you," Cameron said.
Hawthorne nodded without lifting his eyes. Cameron walked out. The moment the door closed behind him, his legs nearly buckled. He gripped the hallway railing and exhaled for the first time in an hour. His hands were trembling, but not from fear, from rage. He had survived, or so he thought. 3 days later, an email arrived. Subject: midterm evaluation. Incomplete submission. Cameron's jaw clenched as he clicked it open. Dear Mr. Bridges, your recent submission for the midterm exam has been reviewed. Due to missing responses and incomplete sections, your test has been marked incomplete. As per academic guidelines, you may file a request for manual review within 72 hours. Regards, Department of Advanced Mathematics. He froze. He knew what he submitted. He remembered every line, every formula, every flipped page. He'd completed the entire packet front to back. He hadn't skipped a single question. This wasn't just sabotage, it was alteration. Cameron rushed to the administrative office. He requested a review of his physical test booklet. The clerk at the desk, a tired man with wire-rimmed glasses, scanned the request slip and nodded. I'll file it. Might take a few days. Cameron pressed his palms against the desk. I need to see it. Now. The clerk frowned. That's against policy. I'm not asking to change anything, Cameron said, his voice low, calm, dangerous. I just want to see what I turned in. The man hesitated, then finally sighed. Wait here. 15 minutes later, Cameron was led to a side room. The test booklet sat on the table. He opened it. The first page was fine. So was the second. Then he flipped to page 4. His answers were gone, replaced with empty graphs, blank spaces, entire sections stripped clean. Questions he'd answered were erased, as if he'd never even tried. But one thing hadn't been erased. His handwriting on the corner margin. A small equation. A side calculation. In his pen. His handwriting. The rest of the page was blank. Cameron stared at it, heart hammering. Whoever had done this wasn't just trying to fail him. They were trying to rewrite his effort into absence. The administrator cleared his throat. Is everything okay? Cameron didn't answer. His hands curled into fists, then released. He grabbed his phone, snapped photos of every tampered page. He turned to the man and said, I'd like to file for manual review, right now. As he left the building, the cold October air bit against his skin, but the fire in his chest drowned it out. They wanted to break him. They thought if they took away his preparation, sabotaged his test, erased his answers, he'd walk away defeated. But they didn't understand who he was. They didn't know what had built him. The world had never handed him anything. And this time he wasn't going to fight alone. That night, he sent the photos to Jordan. She replied instantly, You have them. You have proof. Cameron stared at her message, then typed, They don't want me to fail. They want to make it look like I never tried. Jordan's reply came fast. So let's make sure the world sees exactly how hard you tried. Just as Cameron closes the chat, a new email arrives from the Office of Academic Integrity. The subject line reads, You've been reported for examination misconduct. Investigation underway. Cameron didn't open the email right away. He couldn't. The subject line sat in his inbox like a weight. You've been reported for examination misconduct. Investigation underway. It didn't say allegedly. It didn't say pending clarification. It said misconduct, like it was already true. He clicked it open with the same mechanical detachment someone might use to turn off a fire alarm, after the flames had already consumed the room. Dear Mr. Bridges, this communication serves as official notice that a report of academic dishonesty has been filed against you in relation to the recent midterm examination for advanced theoretical mathematics. Course, you are currently under investigation. During this period, your access to university academic systems will remain restricted. You are not permitted to attend class until the matter is resolved. Please prepare for a formal review hearing. Date to be determined. Office of Academic Integrity, Harvard University. There was no name, no direct contact, no path for defense. It was a wall, cold, immovable. He stared at it for a full minute before letting his head fall into his hands. The sabotage wasn't the endgame. This was. They weren't just trying to humiliate him. They were trying to erase him. By the following morning, he no longer had access to his course materials. His student portal redirected to a temporary page titled Academic Status Pending. His Harvard email no longer received incoming messages from faculty. The campus library denied him entry. He wasn't suspended. He wasn't expelled. He was just gone. Paperless, faceless, stateless, as if his presence had been an administrative illusion, corrected overnight by a quiet sweep of digital whiteout. Cameron walked to Maxwell Hall to see if at least his name was still posted outside his seminar room. The laminated roster was still taped to the bulletin board, but his name was no longer there. His seat had already been reassigned. He reached into his backpack and pulled out his old ID. It still held weight in his hand, but nowhere else. The back of the ID had once read, Harvard Dual Credit Scholar, Verified Student. Now the swipe strip didn't even buzz when he passed through building scanners. He wandered campus like a ghost, watching from the periphery as classmates studied, laughed, and moved on, like he'd never existed in the first place. At lunch he sat alone. He wasn't avoided aggressively. There were no cruel words or confrontations. It was worse than that. It was polite distance, cautious eyes. People nodded at him, just far enough away that they didn't risk proximity. Even Brittany, the classmate who once spoke up in his defense, had gone silent. He spotted her across the dining hall, sitting with a study group he used to be part of. She caught his eye, paused, then looked away like she hadn't seen him at all. The same afternoon, he checked the department's website. His student profile was gone. The bio that had once proudly displayed, Cameron Bridges, dual credit STEM scholar from Atlanta, GA, had been quietly removed. No announcement, no explanation, just deletion. Cameron sent 3 emails to Professor Liu, requesting a meeting. No reply. He left a voicemail for his academic mentor, Dr. Reese Danford, a man who once called him one of the most exciting minds he'd ever seen. No call back. No text. No message. By Friday it became painfully clear. Dr. Danford wasn't just unavailable. He was ghosting him. That evening, Cameron sat on the steps of the campus chapel, notebook in hand, staring at the pages of unsolved theorems he used to find joy in. They meant nothing now. Not because they'd lost their meaning, but because the institution had robbed them of context. What was the point of brilliance when the gatekeepers had already decided it wasn't yours? He'd fought harder than most people, even realized, just to sit in those classrooms. Not because he was chasing prestige, but because he wanted to prove to himself, to his community, to the world, that he belonged in every room they said wasn't made for him. And now they were dismantling him piece by piece. First his credibility, then his records, now his memory. He opened his phone to text Jordan. But before he could, a new message appeared from an unknown number. Are you alone? Cameron froze. Another message followed seconds later. Don't reply, check the bench behind you. He turned slowly. A white envelope sat beneath the edge of the chapel bench. He grabbed it, looked around, but the quad was nearly empty. No one in sight. Inside was a USB drive. Taped to the drive was a sticky note. For your eyes only. I work in admin. This was never supposed to exist. He sprinted back to his dorm, locked the door and plugged it in. A folder popped open. Red flag index, internal use only. Cameron's chest tightened. Inside was a spreadsheet, basic at first glance, until he scrolled through the tabs. Flagged student. Risk profiles. Anomalous academic outcomes. His name appeared on all 3. So did 6 other names. All black students from various STEM departments, spanning the last 8 years. Each profile included vague behavioral notes. Overly confident in class discussions. Unverified academic history. Highly gifted but socially disruptive. Repeatedly challenges faculty position. Displays excessive independent thinking. Under Cameron's name was a final note. Monitored since week 2. Triggered level 3 surveillance following unsanctioned problem solving during week 5 lecture. Recommended early removal. His breath caught in his throat. They hadn't been reacting to him. They'd been tracking him. From the very beginning. Even his midterm was listed. With the label, modified, control version, solo distribution. He scrolled to the final tab. It was labeled, suppressive actions, documentation not for external use. His name was there again, highlighted. The adjacent note read, profile scheduled for digital deactivation. No public statement advised. Coordinate silent exit. Cameron leaned back, his hands shaking. This wasn't just erasure. It was policy. A system of quiet academic redlining, designed to neutralize high-performing black students before their brilliance could disrupt the narrative. And now he had proof. Real, documented, undeniable proof. He emailed Jordan immediately with the subject line, "It's not just sabotage, it's structural." Attached was the spreadsheet, and a photo of the envelope. She replied in under a minute. "This is bigger than I thought. I have someone who needs to see this. Don't go anywhere. Not tonight." Cameron didn't sleep. He kept the light on, phone in hand, door locked. Somewhere between midnight and 3 a.m., his phone buzzed with one more message, this time from the original unknown number. "They know someone talked. Don't trust anyone from admin after tomorrow." The next morning, Cameron receives an urgent call, not from Jordan, but from a different number. A reporter from the Boston Chronicle wants to meet, and says she already has her hands on a leaked version of the same file. The call came just after sunrise. Cameron hadn't slept. His phone was still in his hand from the last encrypted message. When it rang, he almost dropped it. The number was unfamiliar, Massachusetts area code. He hesitated, then answered. "Cameron Bridges?" the voice asked. It was firm, female, and unshaken. The kind of voice that didn't ask unless it already knew. "Yes," he replied slowly. "This is Natalie Cruz, senior investigative correspondent for the Boston Chronicle. I need 10 minutes of your time. Privately." Cameron sat upright. "I don't, how did you?" "I've received a leaked document," she said. "You're listed on it, along with dozens of other students. The file is called Operation Gatekeeper." Silence filled the line. Then Natalie continued, her tone now sharpened by urgency. "Cameron, someone inside your university is flagging high-achieving black and brown students as threats. Not just academically, but institutionally. I have the names, the profiles, the recommendation memos. You're not the first, but if this is real, you can make sure you're the last." Cameron gripped the edge of the desk. "You saw it?" he asked. "I've seen enough to know this isn't an isolated incident," she said. "And I'm not the only reporter who has it. You have a window, and it's closing." She paused, then added, "I can meet in 20 minutes. Bring what you have." Click. Cameron didn't wait. He pulled on a hoodie, zipped his backpack, and slipped the USB from the envelope into his pocket, like it was currency. Because it was, in this moment, it was more powerful than anything he could say. He met Natalie at a corner table in a cafe near Harvard Square. She was already there, laptop open, a manila folder pressed flat on the table. Her dark eyes didn't blink when she saw him. She slid the folder across the table. Inside were photocopies of the exact same files he'd received from the whistleblower. But this version was deeper. It had internal memos, correspondence threads, and most chillingly, a document marked confidential faculty contribution log. Cameron's eyes scanned it. There, third from the top, was the name, Reginald Hawthorne. Beside it, 16 flags submitted, 12 red level alerts, 4 ejections. It hit him like a punch in the ribs. He wasn't just following the system, Cameron muttered. He was helping run it. Natalie nodded slowly. "And your midterm, it wasn't just sabotage, it was policy in action." She flipped to another page, a grid chart labeled risk behavior predictors. Next to his name were phrases like, "Exhibits early signs of leadership, challenges academic authority with logic, rapid advancement exceeds peer comfort, must be observed closely for disruptive ambition." Disruptive ambition. Cameron couldn't even feel his fingers anymore. "What is this?" he whispered. "What is this, actually?" Natalie tapped her keyboard, pulled up a scan of an internal email dated 2 years earlier. It was from the Assistant Dean of Academic Affairs. The Gatekeeper Index isn't about race, it's about behavioral balance. Minority students with accelerated learning paths present unique challenges for long-term curriculum equity. We must be proactive. Cameron read it again. Then a third time. The word equity had been twisted so tightly, it had become a weapon. He looked up. So what happens if I go public? Natalie didn't flinch. They'll fight back. Discredit you. Discredit me. Say it's all out of context. But if the document hits the right channel first, something that can't be controlled, something too loud to contain, then the story outpaces the spin. He swallowed hard. You mean leak it? She nodded. Anonymously. Let the internet do what the administration can't bury. Cameron stared at the folder again. The profiles, the flags, the quiet deletion of dozens of gifted students who were erased before their light could fully shine. He could see Jordan's face in his mind. Langston's. His own mother's voice on the phone. Weeks earlier. They're not gonna stop. Maybe she had been right. But this time, maybe they didn't have to win. He stood up. I need to think. Natalie nodded, closing her laptop. Don't take too long. The fire's already lit. The only question now is who gets to control it. Cameron left the cafe and walked 6 blocks to the Charles River. He sat on a bench, pulled out his laptop, and stared at the cursor blinking on a blank email draft. He didn't need revenge. He needed the truth to go louder than the lie. He zipped the USB into an anonymous email account and attached the folder titled Gatekeeper Operation Final. In the body he wrote only one line. This is what happens when excellence becomes a threat. He BCC'd the email to every major outlet he could think of. The New York Times, ProPublica, Vox, The Root, NPR, and 2 civil rights law firms. Then he paused, hands hovering, one last breath. Then, send. The file was gone. And in that moment, so was silence. Within an hour, Twitter exploded. Operation Gatekeeper. Harvard blacklist. Erased brilliance. Justice for Cameron. Screenshots began flooding timelines. Anonymous profiles confirmed details. Academics from other institutions started reposting and commenting. Even former Ivy League students shared stories eerily similar. Different campuses, same tactics. The story jumped platforms. Reddit threads speculated on how deep the system went. Instagram flooded with visuals of redacted names and profile snippets. TikTok creators posted breakdowns of the racism masked in academic policy. Within 5 hours, the Boston Chronicle published the first exposé with the headline, Gatekeeper Files. Harvard accused of systemic suppression of minority students. Hawthorne's name was in the first paragraph. By nightfall, he deleted his faculty bio and locked his social media. But it was too late. A video surfaced next. A screen recording of Cameron's tampered midterm test, side by side with his original handwritten notes. Thousands watched it in real time as the blank pages revealed unmistakable editing. Erasure as policy. The internet wasn't confused anymore. It was furious and loud. The university issued a statement by 9 p.m. We are aware of the documents circulating online. We take all allegations seriously and have begun an internal review to assess the validity of these claims. But no one bought it, because the evidence wasn't speculative anymore. It was visual, it was emotional, it was real, and it had a name. Cameron Bridges. He shut his laptop. His phone buzzed again, this time with notifications too fast to read. Hundreds, then thousands. He turned the phone off. He didn't need to read them, because he'd done what no one before him could finish. He'd made them listen. The silence was broken, but just as he began to breathe, one final email hit his inbox. No subject, no sender. He opened it. Inside was a single sentence. Now they'll really come for you. 20 minutes later, the university campus is placed on internal lockdown, and an emergency academic hearing is called. The subject? Cameron Bridges' permanent dismissal. 9. Blowback. When truth isn't enough. 1:14. The next morning, the gates of Harvard didn't open to routine. They opened to cameras. Local news vans lined the sidewalks like vultures circling fresh scandal. Tripods sprouted on the lawn. Reporters in stiff coats held mics toward the iconic brick buildings, their voices crisp with scripted urgency. What's being called the most explosive academic racism case in recent Ivy League history. The leak, referred to as Operation Gatekeeper, Implicates top faculty in a covert surveillance program targeting minority students. One name at the center. 17-year-old prodigy, Cameron Bridges. Inside the walls, the university was no longer a campus. It was a battlefield, but one wrapped in polite emails and curated silence. Cameron watched from his dorm window, hoodie up, phone buzzing every few seconds with texts, pings, and mentions. The media had picked up the fire. So had activists. So had politicians. Everyone had something to say. Everyone but the people who mattered most. Harvard's official response came via a 3-paragraph statement, released quietly on its website. We are aware of unverified documents circulating online. Harvard does not condone discrimination of any kind. We are initiating an internal review to evaluate these claims in accordance with university policy. Unverified. That word stung worse than a lie. It wasn't just a denial. It was a dismissal, an institutional shrug meant to drain the oxygen from the fire without admitting it was burning. Hawthorne, unsurprisingly, gave his own response. It came in the form of an exclusive interview with a sympathetic academic podcast titled Real Talk Education Without Emotion. The host introduced him as an esteemed scholar under unfair attack. Hawthorne's voice was smooth, unaffected. I've dedicated my life to cultivating talent. If I flagged students in any internal capacity, it was out of concern, not malice. And I never saw race. I saw patterns. I saw inconsistencies. I saw statistical red flags. That's all. When asked about Cameron specifically, he sighed. Cameron Bridges is a bright young man, but he became a symbol before he proved himself fully. That's dangerous, for him, and for the academy. It was a masterclass in deflection, denying without denying, masking sabotage in the language of caution and care. By noon, conservative outlets had picked it up. Fox, Harvard witch hunt. Brilliant professor canceled by race narrative. The Daily Ledger, another affirmative action collapse. On Reddit, new threads questioned the legitimacy of the leak. One popular comment read, I work in admin. This gatekeeper thing is just a scare tactic. No one's targeting black students. This is just one kid who couldn't hack it. The top reply was worse. If he were really that smart, why did he need a viral leak to save his seat? Even allies grew cautious. Some academic influencers deleted their posts, supporting Cameron after being pressured by donors or department heads. A few faculty members issued carefully worded comments about the need for dialogue and preserving institutional trust. No one said racism. No one said sabotage. Cameron's name was everywhere, but his voice was nowhere in the noise, because he was still suspended, still locked out of classes, still on the outside of a world he had once believed intelligence could unlock. The next day, his mother flew in from Atlanta. She found him seated alone on a stone bench near the philosophy building, hands buried in his sleeves, eyes lost somewhere between fury and fatigue. She didn't speak at first, just sat beside him. Then she placed a small paper bag in his lap. Inside was warm cornbread from home, soft, sweet, imperfect. I didn't know what else to bring, she said, so I brought what I knew you'd finish. Cameron didn't eat right away. He just nodded, tears threatening but refusing to fall. I tried everything right, he whispered. His mother didn't interrupt. I stayed quiet. I showed up. I outworked people. I never cut corners. And now, it's like none of that ever happened. She reached over and touched his shoulder. They know it happened. That's why they're fighting so hard to erase it. He closed his eyes. I don't want to be a symbol, he said. I just wanted to learn. You still can, she said softly. But not the way you thought. At night, Jordan called with a tone in her voice Cameron hadn't heard before. Not rage, not fire, but something quieter and more dangerous. Determination. I found something, she said. Cameron sat up straight. She continued. I dug through the digital archive again. Not just student files, faculty grievances. Most of them are redacted. But not all of them, he asked. One wasn't, she said. It was buried under an unrelated ethics complaint, hidden in a mislabeled folder from 1989. And it's not just about students. What is it? She exhaled. It's a grievance filed by a black professor, a mathematician named Dr. Elias Monroe. He taught here in the late 80s. Bright, published, tenure track. He accused another faculty member of stealing his work, undermining his lectures, systematically isolating him. Cameron froze. Was it Hawthorne? Jordan paused.
Yes, it was Hawthorne.
Cameron leaned forward. What happened to Monroe? That's the thing, Jordan said. After he filed the complaint, there's no record of him after 1990. No resignation letter. No official statement. It's like he was erased. She paused again. Just like a. Cameron's pulse surged. Do we know where he is now? Not yet. But I'm looking. And if he's alive, he's the proof. He's the beginning of the pattern. Cameron didn't speak for several seconds. Then finally, find him. Jordan's voice returned with steel. I will. The call ended. Cameron looked out at the night sky over Cambridge. His reflection faint in the dorm window. The media storm had passed peak velocity. But the institution hadn't collapsed. It hadn't apologized. It hadn't corrected itself. Instead it waited. Calculated. Knowing that outrage fades faster than tradition. Knowing that if they could outlast the headlines, they could reshape the narrative. Make Cameron seem like the outlier. The exception. The problem. But he wasn't alone anymore. Not with Jordan. Not with Langston. Not with Elias Monroe. Wherever he was. There was one last door that hadn't been opened, and they were going to find it. Jordan calls back moments later, her voice shaking. I found him. Monroe's alive. And he says, he has something that could destroy Hawthorne for good. The call came at midnight. Jordan's voice, usually steady and sharp, now shook like she'd been holding her breath too long. I found him, she whispered. Dr. Elias Monroe. He's alive. Cameron's heart skipped. Where? Upstate Massachusetts. A small retirement facility, outside Worcester. He's 78 now, and Cameron, he remembers everything. Cameron sat upright, the dark dorm room spinning quietly around him. For days he'd carried the name like a puzzle piece, unsure where it fit. Now it was pointing toward a door no one had dared open, in decades. Jordan continued, her voice steadier now. He said he's been waiting for someone to ask. Said the silence around him was deliberate, not accidental. And she paused. He says he has something. Physical. A journal. Kept everything. Cameron didn't hesitate. Let's go. They drove out early, bundled in heavy coats, in silence. The sky was pale and overcast, the kind of color that pressed everything down. They didn't speak much. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was loaded. Both knew this wasn't just another piece of the puzzle. It was the origin, the beginning of the system that had swallowed them both in different decades. The facility sat on a quiet stretch of land near a wooded edge, a modest brick structure tucked behind evergreens. No sign out front, no bustle inside, just a receptionist with tired eyes and a guest book. No one had signed that day. Dr. Monroe's room was on the second floor. The nurse outside his door whispered, he doesn't talk much to anyone, barely speaks at all. You're the first visitors in months. Cameron stepped in first. The room was small but clean. A narrow window overlooked the trees. The air smelled faintly of paper and orange peel. And there, seated in a worn recliner, was Elias Monroe. He looked up slowly. His face was aged, but not soft. The lines in his skin didn't sag. They etched. Deep ridges across a face that had held too much truth, too long in silence. His eyes, gray and unblinking, landed on Cameron with a sharpness that surprised them both. You're him, the old man said, voice dry like parchment. The boy they tried to erase. Cameron nodded, his throat tight. Yes, sir. Dr. Monroe's eyes drifted to Jordan. And you were the one before him. She swallowed hard. Yes. He didn't ask why they were there. He already knew. They've kept my name out of every record for over 30 years, Monroe muttered. As if I never taught, never published, never stood behind that podium. But I was there. And I remember everything. He leaned forward slowly, as if the truth weighed more than his bones. Hawthorne was younger then, eager, strategic. I didn't see him coming. He stared out the window. I supervised a research team in '88, early work on quantum abstraction models. I'd been working on something big, something ahead of its time. Hawthorne was just a co-author, supposed to be assisting, but he started leaking pieces of it, claiming them, publishing premature drafts without my consent. Cameron leaned in. Did you report him? Monroe gave a bitter laugh. I filed a grievance, documented everything, thought the truth would win out. His face darkened. The department chair called me combative, said I was disrupting academic harmony. Within weeks my funding dried up. My lectures were reassigned. My name began disappearing from projects I led. He paused, then said something that stuck to the walls like smoke. They didn't argue with me. They just moved around me. That's how they do it. Quietly, systemically, until you stop existing. Durden's eyes brimmed. Why didn't you go public? Monroe's voice lowered. Because in that era, a black professor accusing a white academic of theft wasn't just scandalous. It was suicidal. For your career, your name, your family. He gestured toward the dusty bookshelf near his bed. There's a journal. Bottom shelf. Leather-bound. Cameron moved quickly, pulling it free. The leather was cracked with age, the pages yellowing at the corners. Inside were handwritten notes, timelines, equations, memos clipped from old correspondence, names, dates, references to exact phrases. Hawthorne would later publish in his own work, verbatim. The entries told a story of betrayal layered over years. Monroe hadn't just been discredited. He had been stolen from, and worse, he had been silenced by the very institution that claimed to protect knowledge. I kept that journal because I thought maybe someday someone would come looking. Monroe said, voice cracking, not just for justice, but to understand how far they'd go to protect power. He looked at Cameron with eyes that still held fire beneath the ash. Don't let them bury you like they buried me. Cameron gripped the journal like it was made of glass. Monroe leaned back slowly, as if releasing a weight he'd carried alone for decades. Outside the room, Jordan whispered, "This changes everything." Cameron nodded. "This proves the pattern goes back 30 years. They drove back in silence, the journal resting on Cameron's lap. Every page pulsed with truth, too long hidden, too long ignored. And now, it was in his hands. But Cameron couldn't shake one final image. Monroe in that small room, surrounded by books no one opened, speaking truths no one had asked for until it was almost too late. That was the future they'd planned for him. A quiet erasure, a life rewritten in shadows. But now, the shadows had a voice. And Cameron was going to make sure the world heard it. That night, Cameron opens the journal again and finds a sealed envelope, taped to the last page, labeled in Monroe's handwriting, "For the moment they come for you." Cameron sat at his desk long past midnight, the small lamp beside him casting golden shadows over pages, notebooks, and printouts that formed a fortress of truth. The journal from Dr. Monroe lay open beside him, its final page peeled back just enough to reveal the envelope taped to it, labeled in aged black ink, "For the moment they come for you." He hadn't opened it. Not yet. That moment hadn't arrived. But he knew it would. For now, he had work to do. Monroe's journal had given him more than memories. It had given him equations, dates, drafts, real, intellectual property. Cameron cross-referenced those entries with the articles Hawthorne had published throughout the 90s and early 2000s. The similarities were impossible to ignore. Monroe's models appeared in Hawthorne's papers almost line for line, repackaged with cleaner formatting and different titles, but the mathematical DNA was identical. Then Cameron did something bold. He pulled up his own classwork, the assignment he'd submitted during the early weeks of the semester that Hawthorne claimed had been impossibly advanced, the same problem that sparked the first wave of suspicion. And there it was again, not in full, not obvious, but embedded deep in a 2010 Hawthorne publication, a half-buried variation of the very same logic Cameron had independently reached just weeks ago. Only now he realized Hawthorne had stolen from Monroe, and was still recycling those stolen ideas, passing them off as his own years later. It was intellectual theft on a generational scale. And worse, it had cost people their reputations, their careers, their futures. Cameron began assembling the evidence. He created a digital folder labeled Monroe-Hawthorne Correlation, and filled it with side-by-side scans, Monroe's raw journal pages, Hawthorne's published papers, annotations with red circles around plagiarized formulae, copied graph types, mimicked phrasing. He added the tampered midterm pages, his photographic proof of academic sabotage. He included the gatekeeper index files, with his own profile highlighted. Then finally, he added a new document, a timeline showing how each key piece of Monroe's work had been stripped, altered, and reintroduced over the years, paired with notes about which black students had been flagged shortly after presenting similarly innovative ideas in class. The pattern wasn't just scandalous. It was systemic, calculated, deliberate. By sunrise, Cameron had a dossier that read less like a complaint and more like a bomb. He sent it, not anonymously this time. He forwarded it to 5 major outlets, among them the New York Times, The Atlantic, The Intercept, and ProPublica. But only one responded within the hour. and not with a generic auto-reply. It was personal, direct, and heavy with expectation. Subject: rare request for investigation. Harvard Hawthorne Operation Gatekeeper. Cameron: I've reviewed the attached dossier and spoken to internal contacts. The material is compelling. If true, this is one of the most explosive academic scandals in recent memory. We're prepared to run this, but we need you to go on record. Full name, full voice. Otherwise, this story stays in the shadows. Rachel Lindstrom, Senior Investigative Editor. The Atlantic. Cameron stared at the message for a long time. He had known this moment would come. It wasn't enough to leak information anymore. Not in a world where institutions shrugged off anonymous proof. They needed a face, a name, someone to stand at the center of the fire. But what would it cost? He remembered what Jordan had said after her own attempt to expose the truth failed years ago. They won't just challenge your math. They'll challenge your right to do math at all. Going public meant more than academic risk. It meant full exposure. Online backlash, legal threats, reputational warfare, and maybe worse, the quiet retaliation that always followed too much truth spoken by someone not supposed to survive the room. He stood up, paced the room, looked out the window. Harvard's stone buildings sat cold and silent, like ancient judges, unmoved by truth, unless it came wrapped in credentials they already trusted. But Cameron had earned his place, not through legacy, not through donations, but through proof, through math that couldn't lie, through work that spoke louder than every room that tried to ignore him. He sat back down, opened the reply window, typed, Rachel, if you run the story, you run it with my name. Cameron Bridges, dual credit student, Harvard STEM. If they try to silence me, let them, but make sure the world hears me first. Cameron. He didn't hit send right away. His finger hovered. Then, almost unconsciously, he turned to the journal again. His eyes landed on the envelope. The one Monroe had labeled for this exact moment. The moment they come for you. Hands slightly trembling, he peeled back the tape. Inside was a folded letter, written in the same sharp pen strokes Monroe had used throughout his journal. It read, if you're reading this, it means you survived long enough to find what they tried to bury. They will discredit you before they debate you. They will pathologize your confidence as arrogance. They will frame your genius as threat. But remember, the math doesn't lie, and neither do the scars they leave on the ones who tell the truth. Stand in the fire. That's where history is rewritten. Cameron read it twice, then sent the email. Moments later, his phone vibrated. A new message from the Atlantic's legal team appears, with a warning, be advised. Dr. Hawthorne has preemptively filed a defamation claim. You are now named in an official legal dispute. The studio lights were warmer than Cameron expected. Softer. He thought they'd be harsh, like the eyes that had followed him around campus for weeks, questioning, doubting, dissecting. But here, beneath the lights and behind the microphone, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Control. Across from him sat Rachel Lindstrom, her pen resting on the interview outline, untouched. They had already spoken for 30 minutes before cameras rolled, off record, casual, human. She hadn't approached him like a scandal. She approached him like a student who had survived something most people couldn't imagine. The cameras clicked on, and this time Cameron didn't hesitate. He leaned forward slightly, eyes steady. My name is Cameron Bridges. I'm 17 years old. I came here to study, to learn, to grow. But instead I became a threat, not because I broke the rules, but because I followed them too well. The words weren't rehearsed. They were lived. Over the next hour, the interview unfolded like a masterclass in quiet truth-telling. Cameron laid out the events, from the math problem to the security call, from the email leaks to the tampered midterm. Each moment told not with rage, but with conviction. Rachel asked the right questions. He gave the hard answers. And he didn't speak alone. Midway through the interview, Jordan joined virtually, her face framed by soft light, her voice razor sharp. She spoke of her thesis being discredited, her grades altered, her academic path rerouted because she dared to challenge Hawthorne's authority. Then came Monroe, grainy video, recorded earlier from his room at the care facility. But his voice was clear, deliberate. They erased me, he said. But they didn't erase the truth. Rachel's team layered visuals, graphs, highlighted documents, side-by-side mathematical comparisons. Not conjecture, not emotion, evidence. At one point, Rachel leaned in and asked, what do you want, Cameron? From all this? He didn't blink. I want it to stop. Not just for me. For everyone they buried. He paused, then added, and I want them to admit they did it. The interview aired 2 days later. It didn't trend. It erupted. Within hours, clips flooded social media. A 10-minute segment, where Cameron explained how equations had been stolen, word for word, hit 3 million views by nightfall. A TikTok compilation of Monroe's statements crossed 5 million. On Instagram, Black Ivy League alumni began tagging each other with the hashtag, "We weren't paranoid." On Twitter, Sean Cameron Bridges trended in over a dozen cities. In dorm rooms across the country, Black students watched and whispered, "He said it." By the third day, messages from around the world poured in. Students, professors, public school teachers, parents. People who saw themselves in Cameron's story. People who had always felt the edge of a system that celebrated their intellect. But only when it was convenient. Civil rights groups issued statements. Prominent Black academics wrote op-eds. And then the lawyers came. A coalition of civil rights attorneys, some from the ACLU, others from independent advocacy groups, contacted Cameron directly. They offered pro bono representation. One attorney, a Black woman from Brooklyn, with a reputation for taking down university cover-ups, wrote, "This isn't just about one student. This is about how American institutions respond to Black genius." The university couldn't hold the silence anymore. On day 4, Harvard released a formal statement. In light of recent revelations, and the overwhelming response from the academic community, we are placing Dr. Reginald Hawthorne on administrative leave pending a full investigation. It wasn't an apology, but it was movement. It was acknowledgement. And for the first time, Cameron didn't feel like he was shouting into a void. He felt heard. But victory, in systems like this, never comes without recoil. That evening, as Cameron sat in the quiet of his dorm, sifting through thank you emails and interview requests, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Rachel. "Need to talk. Urgent. It's about Hawthorne." They connected within minutes. Her voice was tight, unnerved. "A legal team. Just contacted my editor. Not from Harvard. From a private firm. High-end. Discreet. Based in D.C." Cameron's stomach dropped. What did they say? "They're representing Dr. Hawthorne, and they've filed a defamation lawsuit against you." Cameron went silent. Rachel continued. "He's claiming you fabricated the story, falsified documents, and coordinated with Monroe and Blake to destroy his career." Cameron's voice finally returned, low and cold. "That's a lie. Of course it is. But here's the twist," she said. "They're not just coming for you. They've filed an injunction against The Atlantic as well. They want the video pulled." "On what grounds?" "Defamation and professional sabotage," Rachel said. "But that's not the worst part." Cameron waited. She exhaled. "The lawsuit is being funded by an anonymous donor. Someone powerful. Big money. This isn't just about Hawthorne. It's about stopping the story before it becomes a movement." Cameron leaned back in his chair, the weight of it all settling into his chest. He had known the risks, but this was something else. This was war. Not just over grades, not just over math, but over the right to be brilliant, Black, and unapologetically true. He ended the call, stood up, and walked to the window. Outside, the same campus that once ignored him now buzzed with quiet revolution. Students whispering. Faculty watching. Reporters circling. Something was shifting, but so were the shadows. He opened the journal again, flipping to the final pages. Monroe's words echoed in his head. "They will challenge your right to do math at all." Cameron clenched his jaw. Let them come. Because this time he wasn't the only one speaking. He had proof. He had people. As Cameron prepares to face the legal battle, his lawyer calls with breaking news. The donor funding Hawthorne's defense? It's a tenured trustee at Harvard, and he's linked to 3 other flagged student removals in the gatekeeper files. The courtroom didn't feel like justice. It felt like theater. Carpets too clean. Pews too polished. Voices too controlled. But beneath the formality sat a quiet war. Not just over facts, but over who had the right to be believed. Cameron stood just outside the double doors, dressed in a navy suit that didn't quite fit his 17-year-old frame. Jordan beside him, jaw clenched, eyes cold with purpose. His lawyer, Malika Raymond, adjusted his collar, then whispered, "Don't let their calm fool you. This is violence, just polished." Cameron nodded, but his stomach swirled with nerves anyway. Inside, the courtroom was already packed. Journalists lined the back rows. Law students scribbled notes. A few Ivy League faculty slipped in under sunglasses, pretending to be invisible. On the opposite side, Reginald Hawthorne sat beside a team of 5 lawyers, well-funded, well-groomed, and clearly well-connected. The lead attorney, a man named Crispin Bell, had the calm arrogance of someone who'd never lost a case. He didn't even glance at Cameron when they walked in. Just sipped his water like this was a business meeting, not a trial over academic racism and reputational destruction. Judge Leona Strickland presided, sharp eyes, graying hair, known for hating theatrics and cutting through fluff. She looked like someone who'd seen both lies and justice weaponized too many times. Opening statements began quickly. Hawthorne's side struck first. "This is not a case about truth," Bell began, "but about narrative manipulation, about a young student who failed to adapt to academic rigor and chose victimhood over growth. Our client, Dr. Reginald Hawthorne, is not just a professor. He is a respected scholar, a published author, and a man whose only crime was asking a student to show his work." Cameron's jaw clenched. Bell continued. "The so-called gatekeeper files? Unverified, unofficial, possibly fabricated. The grievances? Old, speculative, unprovable. This isn't justice. This is a witch hunt." Then came Cameron's turn. Malika stood slowly. No theatrics, no raised voice, just clarity. "This case is about a system that rewards silence, punishes brilliance, and weaponizes respectability to shield misconduct. What Mr. Bridges experienced wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a decades-long pattern, one supported by documents, testimonies, and a university that hoped no one would ever speak this loudly." She turned toward the jury. "We're not asking for sympathy. We're asking for truth." Then began the testimony. First was Cameron himself. He walked to the stand slowly, knees stiff, hands cold. The oath felt surreal. But once he sat down, something shifted. The courtroom faded, and it was just him and his memory. He told it all, from the impossible math problem to the call to campus security, from the tampered midterm to the gatekeeper file. His voice stayed steady, but his eyes flickered when he reached the part about being erased from the syllabus, from the system, from the belief that he'd earned anything. "They didn't accuse me because I was wrong," he said. "They accused me because I was right in a way they didn't expect." Then came Jordan. She spoke with the raw, cool fire of someone who had been waiting 10 years to say these words in a room that had once silenced her. "When my thesis challenged Hawthorne's logic, he called me aggressive in feedback. My grade was lowered. My advisor changed without explanation. I was told I needed to refocus. What they meant was be quiet." Then the bombshell, Elias Monroe, now frail but defiant, was wheeled into the courtroom. He testified with slow, deliberate speech, reading from his original journal and holding up physical pages that matched published Hawthorne material nearly word for word. "I was not just plagiarized," he said. "I was disappeared." Bell tried to object. "Your Honor, this is decades old and irrelevant to the current case." Judge Strickland cut him off. "It's entirely relevant if it establishes a pattern of intellectual theft and racial targeting." The courtroom went still. One by one, more witnesses followed. Former students with eerily similar stories, expert mathematicians confirming the theft of theories, digital forensic specialists validating the timestamp tampering of Cameron's midterm exam. And finally, Malika presented the gatekeeper file. The real one, not screenshots, not rumors. The digital log recovered from the whistleblower's USB, metadata intact. It showed student names, coded evaluations, phrases like high social influence potential, monitor, challenges authority, delayed advancement advised, disruptive brilliance, potential risk to structural harmony. Every flagged student, black or brown. Every flagged theory, advanced, unorthodox, uncomfortable. Then came the twist. Maleka revealed the identity of the anonymous donor funding Hawthorne's defense. Harold H. Llewellyn, tenured trustee, longtime political donor, and more shockingly, a former member of the university's Strategic Academic Oversight Board, the same board responsible for quietly reviewing atypical student trajectories. The courtroom rippled. Llewellyn wasn't just protecting Hawthorne, he was protecting the system. Cameron watched Hawthorne's face for the first time. It cracked. His jaw tightened, his eyes flickered downward. The mask slipped just enough to see the fear beneath it. When it came time for Hawthorne to testify, the defense declined. Too risky. Too late. Closing arguments came swiftly. Bell's final words were desperate but polished. Are we truly ready to dismantle decades of excellence over documents leaked by anonymous sources? This isn't justice. It's performative backlash. Then Malika stood. Her voice didn't rise. It deepened. Excellence doesn't fear scrutiny. It doesn't hide behind anonymous donors and sealed files. What happened here wasn't confusion. It was erasure. Not once, not twice, but for years, and the math doesn't lie. She paused, then added, but sometimes, the people who teach it do. The courtroom held its breath. The judge gave instructions. The jury disappeared into deliberation. Cameron sat in the hallway, head in hands, Jordan pacing slowly beside him. Monroe had been taken home. Reporters loomed outside the courthouse. His mother sat silently beside him, holding his phone so he wouldn't have to see the live tweets, the speculation, the noise. Hours passed. 3, then 4, then finally a clerk stepped out. The jury has reached a verdict. Cameron stood. The world slowed. The courtroom filled again. Judge Strickland returned to the bench. The jury re-entered. Slow, solemn, unreadable. The foreman held a single white envelope. The judge takes the envelope. The foreman's face remains stone cold. Cameron looks across the room at Hawthorne, who is smiling. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Strickland broke the seal on the envelope. Cameron could hear his own heartbeat, slow and heavy, echoing in his ears. Outside, sunlight filtered coldly through the high windows. It felt surreal, like being on the edge of a dream. The judge cleared her throat. In the matter of Bridges v. Hawthorne, we, the jury, find the defendant, Dr. Reginald Hawthorne, guilty on all counts: academic misconduct, defamation, and systemic bias. The words hit him like a wave. As they echoed through the room, Cameron felt the air shift, like the world had tilted slightly on its axis, reorienting itself around a truth long denied. Gasps, murmurs, cries. Not of joy exactly, but of release. People exhaled. Not just those in the courtroom, but in hearts around the country. In dorm rooms, living rooms, libraries. The verdict wasn't just about one man. It was about every student who'd ever been silenced. Hawthorne's slumped shoulders heavy, face pale. The smug arrogance that had carried him through decades of whispered power slipped off. For the first time his gaze flickered. Not to Cameron, not to the courtroom, to the floor. Cameron closed his eyes. He tried to steady his breath. In that moment, he felt more than vindicated. He felt visible, real, present. Outside the courthouse, news vans roared to life. Phones flew up. Shouts erupted. Reporters pounded microphones. For once, the spotlight wasn't stalking him. It was on the institution, on the legacy. By nightfall, the implications spread faster than the verdict. The university issued a public apology, not the long, dismissive kind. A statement acknowledging systemic failings, promising reforms, transparency, a full external audit of all flagged files and past expulsions. The faces that once ignored him now nodded. The classroom door that slammed shut jerked wide open. His record was reinstated. His name restored to the roster. The tampered midterm was voided, and exam accommodations offered. But more than that, the gatekeeper system was exposed. Not as rumor, not as controversial theory, but as fact. Faculty lines formed at exit offices. Professors who had contributed to the internal logs quietly resigned 36 hours after the verdict. One by one, their names vanished from Harvard's staff directory. Departments that had quietly supported or ignored the system released statements citing unacceptable ethical breaches. Outside Harvard, other elite institutions began reviewing their own archives. Deans convened emergency meetings at campuses up and down the East Coast. On social media and in academic circles, the phrase gatekeeper index transformed from whispered conspiracy to public reckoning. In at least 5 universities, student support groups formed, calling for transparency, restorative justice, and independent oversight. Some filed civil suits on behalf of students whose academic records had been quietly scrubbed. Others opened petitions demanding racial equity audits of admissions, grading, and retention policies. In the middle of it, Cameron stood quietly, breathing the weight of it all in. On paper, it looked like victory. On the ground, it felt like the beginning. That evening, in his now restored dorm room, Cameron sat at his desk under a lone lamp. The world was buzzing outside, But inside, silence reigned. He opened his laptop, searching for messages, one after another, congratulatory emails, offers for interviews, scholarship confirmations. Then among them, one that made him stop in his tracks. Subject invitation, graduate offer. Attached was a letter from another elite university, offering him full scholarship to their mathematics graduate program. The kind of offer most seniors could only dream of. But what caught his attention wasn't the offer itself. It was the note enclosed, handwritten. He unfolded it carefully. This seat was emptied long ago. By people who feared the light you bring. Fill it. For all of us. No signature, no name, just a promise, and a challenge. He read the note twice, then 3 times. The pen strokes were precise, patient, like someone who knew the magnitude of what they were asking. Cameron leaned back, his breathing slow and steady. He closed his eyes. In the darkness behind his lids, he saw the faces of those who had helped him. Jordan, Monroe, Langston, Julius, even his mother, all looking at him, with hope, with expectation. And suddenly, he understood. This wasn't the end. Not even close. Harvard had changed, but the world beyond Harvard still needed changing. He picked up the pen, held the note against the paper, and stared at the offer again. Then his phone buzzed. Another email, from a law firm representing dozens of former students, those flagged dismissed or lost. They wanted to assemble a coalition. They asked if he would be their public figure, their symbol, their voice. He closed the laptop. The soft glow faded. The room darkened. For a moment, nothing moved. Then, with a calm decision, he slid the letter and printed documents into a folder. He stood up, walked to the window. Outside, the campus lights burned. But beyond them, city lights, bridges, streets, homes. There were more rooms, more institutions, more doors built to exclude, doors that slams came from behind. He opened the folder, pressed it to his chest. Then he whispered, not to the room, but to the future. I'm coming. As he closes the folder, a knock at the door interrupts the silence. He opens it and finds a plain envelope nailed to the wood. Inside is a single card reading, "Welcome to the real fight." The envelope was unmarked, its paper stiff with weight, nailed into the dorm door as if someone wanted it to be undeniable. Cameron held it between his fingers for a long moment, uncertain whether to open it or burn it. He unfolded the flap and found a single sheet of cardstock, cream-colored and embossed with ink, that seemed too deliberate to be casual. Welcome to the real fight. No name, no signature, just those 5 words, but he knew without doubt who it was from. The handwriting was unmistakable. Dr. Elias Monroe. He flipped the card over. A second message, smaller, written in slower strokes. I couldn't finish my story, but you finished mine. Now finish yours. Cameron sat down at the edge of the bed, the card resting in his palm like a baton being passed from one generation to the next. The words soaked into him, not just as gratitude, not just as closure, but as inheritance. The story was his now, not just to survive, but to reach. 2 weeks later, he walked onto a different campus, not as a protester, not as a plaintiff, but as a guest lecturer. The invitation came quietly, days after the trial, from the very university that had once overlooked his application. Now they were asking him not only to enroll, but to lead a discussion on academic gatekeeping, systemic bias, and the future of intellectual equity. The irony wasn't lost on him. He stood at the podium that day, not with trembling hands, not with doubt, but with the calm of someone who had walked through the fire and come out intact. The lecture hall was packed, buzzing with anticipation, not one seat empty. Faculty in the back, students lined along the walls. As he looked out at the crowd, Cameron saw something different from what he'd seen that first day in Hawthorne's classroom. No suspicion, no whisper, only eyes wide, listening, waiting. He adjusted the microphone, cleared his throat, and began. I was 17 when I was told that brilliance in a black body was suspicious, that solving a problem too fast meant I must have cheated, that knowing too much, too young, meant I didn't belong. He paused, letting the truth hang. But what I've learned is that systems don't collapse from outrage. They collapse when truth stands long enough to be seen. He moved through the presentation, showing the gatekeeper files, the lineage of stolen work, the pattern of silent sabotage. But he didn't just dwell on the damage. He spoke of solutions, of what justice looked like, Not as revenge, but as redesign. What would education look like if we weren't asking who deserves a seat, but why the seat was ever guarded to begin with? The room was still. Then, midway through, something remarkable happened. A hand went up in the back. The moderator nodded, and the student, tall, broad-shouldered, probably first generation like him, stood and asked, "Why did you keep going? After everything?" Cameron exhaled, then smiled softly. "Because I knew I wasn't just protecting my story, I was carrying theirs." Jordan's, Monroe's, every student who walked away thinking maybe they were the problem. I stayed because silence is what they count on, and I wanted to be louder than their comfort. Applause erupted. Not the polite, academic kind, but real, roaring, defiant applause. It rolled across the lecture hall, like thunder, not because he was a genius, not because he was a guest, but because he was proof. He didn't just survive the erasure. He rewrote it. After the lecture, as he gathered his things, students swarmed him, not for photos but for stories. They wanted to tell him theirs. They spoke of advisors who dismissed them, of professors who passed over their ideas, of classrooms where they were invisible, and one after another they whispered, "I thought I was alone." That night, he returned to his temporary housing, not a dorm, but a small university guest suite. On the desk was a package wrapped in brown paper. No label, no sender. Inside, a copy of Monroe's original thesis, Cognitive Equilibrium and Symbolic Disruption in Advanced Theoretical Structures. Unpublished, unbound, but intact. A note was attached. "For the archives they never made for us. Keep this safe." He held it to his chest and wept, not from pain, from knowing he was no longer carrying the weight alone. Weeks passed. His story spread, not as a scandal, but as a study. Universities that once blacklisted him now quoted him, conferences invited him, schools began revisiting old files, unflagging students who had been quietly filtered out by systems like Gatekeeper. A movement was forming, not under his name, but under the question he had forced into the national dialogue. Who decides who belongs? And why? But legacy isn't a parade. It's a whisper passed through time. One afternoon, Cameron received a message from a former classmate, one who'd laughed along with the room when security was called that day. The message was short. "I watched your interview. I was wrong. I'm sorry I didn't stand up." Cameron didn't reply. He didn't need to. Because the truth had done what silence never could. It turned shame into accountability, ignorance into awareness. And one morning, back at Harvard for an official ethics panel, he walked the same hall where he'd once sat in silence. He passed the classroom where Hawthorne had once held court. It was empty now. The name plaque removed. The echo of power gone. But something new hung on the wall outside. A framed quote, etched in steel. "The equation only works when all variables are allowed to exist. See Bridges." Cameron stared at it for a long time, then smiled. He had never wanted fame. He had wanted freedom. For himself. For others. For the students who came after, who might never have to explain why their intelligence was real. He walked down the corridor, head high. Then just as he reached the auditorium exit, a voice called out from behind, "Hey, wait." He turned. A young black student, maybe 16, hoodie too big, backpack heavy with textbooks, stepped forward. His voice was nervous, but his eyes were sharp. "I've watched your lecture like 5 times. Cameron chuckled. "You must be sick of it by now." The boy shook his head. "Nah, but I've always wondered something. That first day, back in Hawthorne's class, that problem, you solved it in under a minute." Cameron nodded. The student leaned in, hopeful. "How'd you do it so fast?" The question hovered in the air, pure curious, childlike, and Cameron didn't flinch. He looked the student square in the eyes, and answered, "Because no one told me I couldn't." The student stood stunned, not at the answer but at the permission buried inside it. Cameron turned and walked off, the echo of his footsteps following a path he had carved not with permission but persistence. He didn't just win. He didn't just survive. He changed the game. No one should have to solve their own erasure just to be seen. If Cameron's story made you feel something, it's because this isn't fiction. It's reality for too many. Type yes if you believe brilliance should never be silenced. Subscribe if this broke your heart.